morning. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Let me get set up here really quick. As you may have noticed, I am not that good-looking man, Alberto Almeida. I am sorry to say you have been downgraded today. Nevertheless, I indulge your patience because by now you've learned importance about patience everywhere. And I want to take a couple of minutes with you to talk about the passage. Nothing in life is certain but death and taxes. So said Benjamin Franklin. Death and taxes. And taxes. Taxes sometimes happens as well. How come? And by the way, we are not going to be talking about taxes today, so you're okay. Just want to get that out of the way. How come? If there is one certainty in our lives, and that certainty is that eventually our body will perish. How come we are so scared of it? How come we spend so little time talking and preparing ourselves for it? If there is one universal truth, one commonality to all of us in this room, is that eventually a body will pass. Are we prepared for it? How should we take it? Do we understand it? In the next couple of minutes, we hope that we may talk about a couple of facts, a couple of perceptions, that we hope will lend some credence to the idea that death is not the end, and that we must fundamentally rethink the way we live so that we are better prepared to die. If that is okay with you, I want to start by reading you a little poem by Dylan Thomas, who was born in 1914 and passed away in 1953. And I think it sums up our current social understanding, fear, mindset towards death. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at the end know the dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds may have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight and learned too late they grieved on its way, do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my Father, there on said height, curse, bless me. Now with your fierce tears I pray, do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. If you have a certain proclivity towards words, you may be taken by the sudden weight of this poem, which summarizes, in a way, our society's view of death, something that we might fight against with all strength, against all odds, to avoid it in whatever way possible. But why is that? Why would we want to avoid death? It is the big unknown. We fear things. We have a sense that maybe we will stop existing afterwards. We simply don't know, or we think we don't know. And so we go on about our lives doing what oftentimes we do best with death and taxes. We avoid it. We avoid it. And I want to bring a couple of facts to you to help us illustrate that point. Because sometimes it happens in a subconscious level and we don't even realize it. I'll give you a simple example. 14.5 million are the number of cosmetic plastic surgeries in this country every year. Cosmetic surgeries. I'm not talking about reconstructive surgeries, plain cosmetic surgeries. That is an average of 40,000 cosmetic surgeries a day. It's a lot. That's a population of 300 million people. But if we look at our also beloved country, Brazil, we'll see that in Brazil, there are 25 million cosmetic surgeries a year. That's an average of 68,500 cosmetic surgeries a day. Now, am I saying cosmetic surgeries are bad? By no means. That is not what I'm saying. But what I mean to hint at is the idea that we're so fixed in the here and now in our physical bodies that we attempt to maintain our youth in a psychological process that is meant to avoid the fact that we too shall pass. That we, our physical bodies, will change with time, and we'll face the unavoidable certainty that this body will be gone. Never before in the history of mankind and medicine have we seen so many drugs, procedures aimed at prolonging life, which in itself is not a bad thing. But we must come to terms with the fact that life has a beginning, physical life has a beginning, and will have an eventual end, that we know. So why is it that we try to rage against the dying of the light? Because we're so stuck in our image of what the world is that we are unable to see its true essence. Why do we fear death so much? Let me ask you, have your parents talked to you about death? Have they prepared you for the fact that eventually they may die or you may also pass? Probably not. Not a lot of us have had that kind of education. Yet, they have talked to us about finances. They have talked to us about sex. They have talked to us about the importance of keeping good company. They have told us to have good manners at the table. But some important and fundamental conversations as to who we are still fundamentally difficult. And if I am honest with you, partially to blame is religion. Our image of death, or the image of death that we pass on to people, or the information that we tell people, it's hardly enough in the modern day to really prepare or get them thinking. If I make a brief pause here and consider that most religions work from revelation to interpretation. What do I mean? At one point in time, every religion has a revelation. Some kind of divine spark or information comes to certain people. And they deem that to be so important that they decide to build a whole practice and a whole field of knowledge around it. And they hold on to that. And from there on, we play a game of telephone. Those who first started tells those that come afterwards, who tell those that come afterwards. And because that first fact was seen to be so important, oftentimes in our desire to control our environment, we say, nope, we should not look at anything else out there because I have my primordial facts. This is what matters. And we keep telling others about it and their children, playing this immense game of telephone. And have you played a game of telephone before? Do you know what happens at the end? The message is fundamentally changed, right? So when we do that, we arrive with a different meaning. And sometimes we lose some richness of detail or meaning. And death is one of those things that we first talk about and then pass it on and on and on and on. And for whatever reason, it gets put aside. And we're so scared of it. We're so scared of it. If only we had a way of going back to those people in the beginning and say, hey, is this what you really meant to tell me on the game of telephone? Was this the original message? Wouldn't it be better if we got clarity that way? We wouldn't be as confused. However, most of our organized religions retreat unto themselves and saying, this is what it is. We must not question it. And in doing so, we shy away, we shoo away anybody who might be willing to learn or interested to learn about it and who have not had the pleasure of having the same background, experiences, and culture that we had. So there are a lot of people out there who are seeking to understand death, but they do not find how. And there are those of us who have been exposed to it, but also are not paying attention. Which is funny because we see, and doctors see this quite often as well, that people tend to attune into their spirituality later in life. When it dawns upon them that part of life, a physical life, is gone, and we start to do some mental calculations and say, well, if I'm 40 and the average lifespan, it's 75, I'm halfway there, right? What will I do with my retirement? But the funny thing is, people don't die from old age. Contrary to what you might have heard, people die for being people. Because young people die too. So we think that death is also the realm of old age, but it isn't, because, and I do not mean to scare you, but we could walk outside today and something could happen, a car could come by, and we could be taken from this physical life in a split second. Are we prepared to go? If that happened today, and don't answer out loud, it's a rhetorical question. This is a rhetorical question. If that happened today, would you be prepared to go? Would you? And more importantly, what would you need to do to be prepared to go? Chances are, this question might review some important things for you that you may have put aside and that you might want to consider, because it will happen. Well, not the scary part of the immediate part. Mind you, I'm not a medium, I'm not prophesizing, I'm not cursing you. And I don't mean to scare you either, but those who care for each other ought to have earnest and frank conversations with each other. And out of care and out of love, I should ask you this question. Are you prepared to go? I ask myself that sometimes. And it's a scary thought. It is really a scary thought. For me, there is one fundamental thing that eases the whole process. Understanding. It doesn't mean it makes it less scary. Well, it actually does. It doesn't make that it completely takes the scare away, but it makes it easier to understand things. And so, if we have been playing the game of telephone through the ages with knowledge, what if we could go back and ask those who told the original thing to us, those that gave us that original revelation? What if we could speak to those that have gone before us and ask them, how does this happen? That would be fundamentally liberating and changing. Guess what? That's why we're here. That's exactly what happened and has happened throughout society. Throughout the realm of human history, we have always been able to go back and talk to the spirit of those who have passed before us. But it wasn't until the 1850s that we have been able, as a society, to codify, to bring that together in a systematic way that makes it easy for anybody who is willing to put the time and effort into it, to understand how communication with the spiritual world happens and what kind of information we may get back. Did you know that the Medium's book, published by Allan Kardec, was the first treatise on the interchange between the two realms of life? It was the first comprehensive study about how to interact with those who have gone before us. Have you read it? Yes, most of us have. Right? You don't have to read it, but it's important for you to understand that there is such a resource there should you want to. It's important for us to verify and check where our information comes from, because our information will stay in our brains and we'll make a philosophy out of it, and out of that philosophy we'll apply it to our lives, and we're going to make a whole way of behaving out of it, and it will become our acts, our habits, and everything else. So the information that comes into our brains, into our minds, fundamentally determines how we see the world. So let's ask ourselves culturally and socially really quick. Where does our information about death as a society come from? From religions who have organized over time and have played a game of telephone for thousands of years. I do not mean to diminish any religion. Let me be clear. Those things are important. But along the way, some of it gets lost. So we need to make sure that we are verifying as we go to see if it makes sense. Did you know, and I think this is funny, maybe just because I have a horrible sense of humor, but did you know that most religions, like the main religions, are pretty old, so to speak, right? We have Hinduism, thousands of years, Buddhism, thousands of years, Christianity is going on 2,000 years, right? Judaism longer. Not even talk about the old mythologies and everything else that can also be construed as a religion. And this is when I make a plug for the lecture after lunch, if you have the patience to stay with me. One of the youngest religions we have out there, Islam, is about 1,400 years. If we look back in science, what was happening 1,400 years ago, Earth was still flat. In fact, Earth was not only flat, it was flat, but people also struggle to find out how it floated in space, because they're stars. We've always seen that. Do you know what one of the accepted beliefs at the time was? How to explain that the Earth was flat and how it would float in space? This is a good one. This is my favorite. I kid you not. Some people actually believe this. The flat Earth was supported by a turtle, who itself was supported by another turtle, who was supported by another turtle, all the way down. Down to where, we don't know, but all the way down. We've made progress, though. Eventually, we found out the Earth was round. Yay. Right? Or rediscovered it. And I kid you not, this is going to blow your minds. You ready? The universe does not revolve around the Earth. You heard it here first. Actually, you didn't. Poor Copernicus. But you get my point. The interesting piece is science has been able to progress over time by the observance of facts, and has been able to look at the new facts and decide what should stay and what should go. I've got a new fact. I look back now and I see that the old facts no longer fit. I will dispose of that piece, I will keep something else, and I'll build what we call a new paradigm. And we keep doing this in what I call the wash, rinse, and repeat cycle. We do that, that's how we evolve. But we have been unable to do that in religious thought, oftentimes, which is a shame. And now if we look at science, not only do we know that the Earth is somewhat round and that it revolves around the sun, big deal, but the sun also revolves around other stars, and that we live in a galaxy, the Milky Way. And in that galaxy, there are 200 billion stars, would it be? And there might be more than 500 other billion galaxies with 200 billion stars out there. The world has changed, but it has remained the same. It's always been the same, but our interpretation of it has changed because we have slightly different facts. And so in this journey of science, we begin to see that which we look at can be interpreted in many different ways, but if we are open to see it, if we have eyes to see it. Since we're talking about poetry, one of my favorite poets, T.S. Eliot, has in one of his great poems, perhaps one of the greatest poems ever written in the English language, called the Four Quartets. Towards the end, he says, "At the end of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." That is that moment when we go back and we do our things and we come back to where we were before, and we looked at what we had before and the facts that we had before, and we see them in a completely different light. They're the same, but they're completely changed. And that, in a way, is kind of what we need to do with death. So this passage doesn't become the end. Well, it turns out that humanity has been doing that for a while, and now it's more easily accessible nowadays, even if we have become quite sarcastic about it as well as a society. But this we know. Our bodies eventually fade and perish and die. Our soul lives on. Now, we might debate what happens to our soul afterwards, and we can talk about that. But all religions pretty much agree that our soul lives on. So that in itself should bring us a modicum of comfort. It should at least give us a sense of death is not the end, right? We need to hold on to that piece. But what if we want more information? Well, we can have more. And we Spiritists have been exactly working in that realm where traditional religions often stop, which is death, and where science has not yet begun. So we study the nature of souls, their origin, where we come from, where are we going to, and how they relate to the physical world. It's one of the definitions of Spiritism Allan Kardec gives us in what is Spiritism. It is a body of knowledge that studies the origin, the destiny, and the nature of souls and how souls relate to the physical body. It's quite a sentence. Because of that, we have been able to ask those who have gone before us, and not just anybody, but many of them, over time, what happens? And they have categorically told us, life goes on. So much so that now we're speaking to you. If there was nothing afterwards, you wouldn't be speaking to us right now, yet we speak to you every single day. And they go on to tell us as well that we remain the people that we are. It is not because we go through this passage that we fundamentally change all of a sudden. And that begs the question of what is it that I'm doing today to continue my life afterwards? Because you see, the funny thing about fear is that it focuses us on ourselves. Whenever we are fearful of something, right, we by instinct have been led to focus on ourselves, which is quite normal because it has served us a great purpose in our evolutionary process. When we were back in the day hunting in the woods and a tiger jumped from out of a tree, right, those fears, those hormones kicked in, your brain went into overdrive mode, focused you on a couple of things that were right ahead of you, and you could run away. At that moment in time, when a tiger jumps from out of a tree, nobody goes, oh, what a lovely tiger. Look at what mighty nice nails and teeth he has. Should I pet it? He seems so fuzzy. These are not thoughts, right, that occur to us when we are in fear. It's like, ooh, tiger, run, right? Even our language gets short. Ooh, tiger, run, right? And we go. And it makes us focus on ourselves. Only when we are able to outrun the tiger, let's pretend we can for a second, we relax. And then all these endorphins and everything else our brain releases lets us relax, and we feel tired, and we feel that post-traumatic stress rush. And then we are able to notice everything else and say, whoa, oh, the tiger is no longer around. What a beautiful day it is. Look at that beautiful sun. Look at those flowers. How wonderful, right? 5 minutes before, we were not happy about life, right? But 5 minutes after, we are. Again, the same thing fundamentally changed. So fear does that to us. It helps, it makes us focus into ourselves, into our own little world, and shy away from each other. And when we're in fear, it begins, everyone fend for yourself. You're not really interested in other people. And so our thinking of fear in relations to death has made us very lonely, because we generally think about death just as something that will come and get us or those we love. And we forget to think that every single one in this room will go through this process. And if your soul will survive the passing of death, and you will, spoiler alert, you will meet those that you used to hang out with before. Isn't that more reassuring, or should be reassuring? If it isn't, you need new friends. But think about it. What we're really doing is moving from one state of being into another state of being. Of course, the physical body won't be there, but we'll have a semi-material body, we learn from our spirit friends, the perispirit, that may or may not resemble our current body for a while because it's kind of plastic. And we will prepare then to continue to learn, and eventually we'll come back into this world. Now let's talk about the process a little bit, because people are always curious, and we do not mean to exhaust the whole topic, right? But how does the process of passing takes place? What we have learned through our research with those that have come before us, and we have vetted and tested and seem a lot wiser than we are, that we have Oh, we are a spirit. We don't have a spirit. We have a body. We are a spirit. We have a body. We're not a body that has a spirit. We need to fundamentally change that mind shift. We are a spirit that has a body. And the spirit is so subtle. It's so almost like, air. And our body isn't. And it's one of the reasons why we can't always see spirits, because they're so subtle that we don't have the ability to. It's so different. Some of us might every once in a while, but most of us don't see them. Right? Topic for another conversation. File that away. To make something that is so dense and heavy talk to something that's so airy and light, we need an interpreter. Much like we have an interpreter now for those of you who may not speak English or may prefer, very smartly, not to listen to me. Because I know there might be some of you with the headset on, just off. Just looking. Either that or listening to Miley Cyrus right now. If you're listening to Miley Cyrus, people, shame on you. Anyways, and you can't laugh, because if you laugh, you'll give away that we know that you're listening to Miley Cyrus. So keep a straight face. But anyways, we need a translator. We need a go-in-between. And that is called a perispirit. Think about it as the clothes of the spirit that makes it talk to the body. It's like we have many layers, right? And I like to joke around saying that, and pardon me because I am not really great with words, I call the perispirit sometimes the underwear of the spirit. Right? The body is your clothes, and the perispirit is what goes in between your clothes and you. And which also explains, by the way, if you're interested in topic for another conversation, why sometimes we have an illness and we're able to deal with it on the physical body and it disappears and then it comes back again. Because it disappeared from our clothes, but not from our underwear. Allow me to explain before it gets really weird. Imagine for a second that you fall into a pool, right? You get pushed into a pool for whatever reason, because you have a friend that's having a party, throws you in a pool. You get out of the pool and you're all wet. So what do? You go into your friend's house, take out your jacket, your shirt, and put a new shirt on. But you do not change your underwear because you don't want to use your friend's underwear. Understandable. Everybody with me so far? Okay, good. Just want to make sure. If you do want to, I don't want to hear. Anyways, once you go and you put the clothes on and you walk outside and you talk to your friends, you sit down, what's going to happen? Your clothes are going to get a little wet again, right? You may have changed clothes, but your underwear still has that water that it needs to dry out, right? And so after a while, you're going to get yourself wet again, and you will have to change again, right? If you do this enough times, your underwear will be dry because it will pass on to the body. In a way, this is what happens with us. Our moral tendencies and problems and bad habits are like that underwear. And sometimes they trigger effects on our physical body that leads the body to degenerate quicker, specific areas or not. And we can change bodies. We can remove that water we can take the jacket off, dry it out, put it back on. But if we don't address the root causes of our problems, which is our underwear, our body will continue to get wet, and we will continue to change clothes. That is why, my friends, God has given us reincarnation, so that we have the ability to slowly purge all that underwear water out. Now, if we are smarter, right, some of us might go and say, well, I know what's going on here. Let me try to dry my underwear before I put clothes on. Or whenever it gets wet, I go back and I reflect on it and I try to dry myself to make the process quicker, right? And that is what we call to do. We get to decide how we change clothes a little bit, but we must. And if we don't pay attention to it, it's just going to take a lot of clothes until we're dry. So, very scientific, as you can tell. I know that sometimes the scientific language goes all over everybody's head, so if you didn't understand it, can't help you. All jokes aside. So the process of dying, of passage, is that of removing our clothes, going back into our house, reflecting on what has happened, and preparing to don on new accoutrement. Fancy, huh? That's what it is. And we know that all of us do it. And we know that while we're doing it, while we're changing our clothes, it's not as big as a deal as it seems as when we first get wet. So the passage, the act of passing, is in fact the act of relinquishing our physical body for a second, allowing our spirit and our perispirit to slowly detach from the body, which happens most naturally at old age, when the body starts to fade away and all the energy field and so forth that we can get into later starts to slowly disconnect. And that is why sometimes you see folks who are reaching the end of their stay with us when they're older in hospitals having a little bit of perceived dementia. They start to live already in the other plane. They're already making their way there because the body is already working itself out naturally. And eventually we pass. And we know this because our spirit's friends have told us. But we also know this for a variety of reasons. We know this because there's also near-death experiences where people who are partially dead detach themselves from the body for a short period of time, from those still connected, and they see those who were there before, or more interesting, describe things that are happening in a room nearby. Because describing somebody that you've met before, it's kind of like, how can you really know if that's happening? They're probably expecting it. They could have made it up. But if you detach from your body and you go in and say, wow, in the other room over there, while I was clinically dead, I saw this person saying this, this, and this. How did you know that? Well, because you were detached from your body. So it happens. So we have even a little bit of scientific evidence around this as well. We also have reincarnation studies, many of them by the late Dr. Ian Stevenson, which is now still going on, by other folks, that studies childhood memories of children remembering facts from previous lives. Well, let's slow down a little bit. Think with me. If for a second you accept that might actually happen, let's pretend we do it for a second, then you must necessarily connect the dots and say, well, this person was here, this person died, something of that person survived and eventually inhabited another body. And if you do that, then you see that there's a spirit, and that spirit has passed and come back. So the passing is not as mystical and fuzzy as we have this image that it is. It's actually quite well documented, but we just don't have that information. We haven't paid attention to it. Isn't that interesting? I find that interesting. It's right in front of us. If we change our minds, we change our lives. We need to start changing our minds in respect to this, because we need to consider ourselves as people who changes clothes and not as the clothes we wear. Although our physical body, our society nowadays, does value clothes quite a bit, metaphorically and not, we need to look beyond that. We need to see that we go on and ask ourselves another important question. If you were put in front of your friends and we put a screen in front of them and we change their voices, would you recognize them by what they say? Or would you just recognize them because you see them and the outside piece makes you think? It's an interesting question. I'll be curious to do that experiment. Right? Maybe that's the one reason, and I am not joking about this, that why a lot of folks are finding love nowadays or human connection through the internet. Because you don't get to see the person before you meet, and you get to interact with that person and talk and converse, which is kind of hard nowadays, right? Because young people, when they go to meet somebody, where do they go? They go to clubs. Have you been to a club? Hello? What's your name? What? Samantha. What's yours? 30 minutes. Gets me going, people. We can't talk to people. I joke around with my friends like, hey, you guys, I'm so blessed. I'm married. I'm really lucky. Where do you go to meet people these days? Because most people are not interested in talking. They're interested in posturing and looking at their clothes. You got to change that fundamentally. So I tell them, go hang out in libraries. Go hang out at bookstores, but not by the self-help part. Those people need help. Go find people who are trying to, just kidding. Honestly, we need to kind of reevaluate our relations with folks and focus on what's really, really meaningful. And ultimately, what's meaningful is our essence. Something very interesting happens too, and since we're having a literary day, if that's okay with you, I'm going to pull out Shakespeare, because nobody can really talk about literature without, there's got to be a little Shakespeare, right? Makes you look like smart. I need it. I'm pulling all the stops, people. I need it, as you can tell. So we all heard that dialogue, the monologue from Hamlet, to be or not to be, that is the question. It's a whole existentialistic piece. He's actually contemplating maybe even committing suicide at that point. To sleep, perchance to dream. And then he said something that's fascinating and it rings very true. He says, what dreams may come when we shed this mortal coil must give us pause. And he's basically wondering what wonderful things or what incredible unknown things will happen when we shed this mortal coil, when our body goes. Should give us pause. We should stop to think about it. Because here's an interesting fact that happens during our passing too. When we lose our physical body, we feel less encumbered. When we're just running around in our underwear, singing at home, we are freer. If we have the windows closed. We are freer. But you get my point. It's easier to move. So when we pass and we shed our mortal coil, when we shed this physical body, our mind, which really is our spirit, sees more clearly. And we'll see everything more clearly. The good that we have done and the not so good we've done. Or the good that we did not do. And so we will become more critical of ourselves, and it might be hard for us at points to be able to move forward. So we will be thrown into a little bit of a shock eventually, slowly and gradually, because God is no tyrant. God gives us what we can handle in the speed and extent that we can. Otherwise, God would not be fair, would it? If God gives you something that you cannot handle, that's a mean God. So in fact, all the challenges in our lives are subtle compliments. If you have eyes to see, when something really hard is happening, if you stop to think and say, there is a God, God's all loving, all caring, and all knowing, God would not give me a hurdle that I cannot surpass. Therefore, I can solve this. Maybe not by myself, but there will be a way around this. Maybe not the way I want to, but there will be a solution for this. Isn't that interesting? Instead of despairing, we can move forward, which it is indeed the great example that we also see in the New Testament between the two great figures who seemingly done almost the same thing, which is betraying the Christ. You know the story. Judas hands the Christ in, hoping that that will spark a political revolution and therefore spread the message of the Christ even farther. And Judas denies the Christ 3 times. And Peter denies the Christ 3 times. 2 different people with 2 different perspectives, basically doing the same thing. The difference, however, Judas was not able to handle that fact afterwards in that life, and eventually committed suicide. Peter, however, got bogged down by what he had done, but decided to put his shoulder into it and work to figure it out. And in fact, we know that Peter became the leader of that nascent group. And in great part, the words of the Christ that we have today are due in part to his effort. And so when we come to that moment of realization, when we get there, it's also upon us to decide how we are going to do this. So the passing is a milestone that we get to decide how we handle. Are we going to handle it in fear and avoidance, as we have done for generations and incarnations? Or are we going to decide to recheck our facts, recheck our interpretation and our understanding of the world, and look upon it with a new light? No judgment. This is your choice. We all have a choice. That's the beautiful thing about God. But it is up to us to decide. And let me tell you, not deciding is also a choice. So we need to work on that, because not deciding is also a choice, which means not doing anything about it. And when we look at that, when we understand that our life goes on, that we have an opportunity to move forward, it should bring us a great sense of hope. Because it tells us that everything that we have done well, we will take with us. If we have gathered many friends and created great relationships, they will live with us when we pass and when our friends pass. Not only that, but they will live on forever, because we will live on forever. So the bonds that we build today, the friends that you make today, the family members that you love today, they will never cease to exist. Neither will you. So your friendship will continue to grow, which means that the friends you make on this life will be added to the friends you will make in the next life, and the friends that you made in the lives before. Which means there's an incredible amount of love and friends for you out there. You might just not see it. Isn't that amazing? That should touch the fiber of our souls. When you think you are not loved, when you think you're lonely and alone and forgotten, you are not forgotten. Not by God, not by all those people who love you and who are intrinsically tied to you. That's beautiful. Hold on to that, if anything else that I say today. Because we all go through those moments. And when we understand that life goes on, we also understand that escaping life is not the solution for our problems. We will take those problems with us. And in doing so, without a physical body, we might find ourselves even more encumbered by our problems and the problems we create by escaping life. And I'm talking here, friends, about suicide. Did you know that about 117 people a day in this country commit suicide? That's 5 an hour. By the time I'm done talking here, 5 people in this country have decided to have taken their lives. Why do I say that? Because we have to fundamentally, as a group, change and contribute to the overall perception that life ends. Because it doesn't. It goes on. Let's not look at death as the big nothing. Let's not look at death as the big nothing. Let's shift our minds. And just really honestly think that passing is just a milestone in our spiritual evolution. Much the same way we go to work in the morning, we go back home, take our clothes off, think about the next day, decide what is it that we are going to do the next day, and go back to work the next day. Every incarnation is almost like a day at work. We are going to work here, people. At the end of the day, we'll return home, talk to our loved ones, regroup, come back, and work again. Why? Because we are working towards growth. What does that mean? Happiness. Fulfillment. Not just our own. Because remember, we don't live in fear anymore. We're not just thinking about ourselves. Because we also find that our good spirits tell us, in question 132 of the Spirits book, a fantastic book, by the way, they basically ask, what is the meaning of life? And the good spirits reply, to evolve, basically. That is the first one. To grow. I think we all know that. But there's a second one they put in there because sometimes we forget. And to play our part in the creation. We have a responsibility towards each other. We don't live alone. The reason why we're here is because we have different people in our lives. So it's important for us to remember that by changing our acts, by changing the way we interact and feel and do things, people will notice and it would affect them too. It doesn't mean that we have to go and knock on doors and tell them, people, you're not going to die, don't worry. That's not what we're saying. Sometimes we push that away, right? Because that's what oftentimes religion has done through the times when we try to force our views on other people. Just be different. And by being different, people will notice. And you will give them permission to reevaluate how they see things. And death will stop being this thing that really doesn't exist to something that we should be looked for. Because think about this. It is scarier to be born than to die. Dying is relatively easy. To be born, 9 months, getting ready to come back here, slowly forgetting that you're a spirit, watching a little body grow, knowing that you have this thing that you got to do, but you're not sure if you're going to be able to do it. 9 months, that's the scary part, people. We've done the scary part. Right? Think about it. When you think with the eyes of the Spirit, right? It's a little different. Let's shy that away. Let's take that out. Forget about that. And never forget for a single moment that you will live on and those around you will live on. And if you don't like your life right now, keep working at it. You will get better. Ask for help. And eventually you will get another go at things. If we've made mistakes too and that we regret, let's work towards them. And if we can't wrap them up in this lifetime, we'll have a chance to do it in the next lifetime. It's beautiful. It's a win-win situation. We win because we got new chances to do things we didn't do well. And we win because we get to do great things again if we've done them well. God loves us. And it's amazing. And so in the interest of passing from this podium out, because I know that I am your rite of passage between now and a break, I wanted to finish with a slightly different version of poetry. Funny enough how the stronger poems are oftentimes more known in our world, and the softer, subtler ones, not so much. Here's one by the poet Mary Elizabeth Fry in the 1920s that a lot of people don't know about, but I want to read to you so that you remind yourself at all times that you're an immortal spirit that may change clothes, that may face passages, figuratively and physically, but your spirit goes on. Who you are and what you do lives on with others and obviously with yourself as well. And so Mary Elizabeth Fry, in her poems, says, "Do not stand by my grave and weep. Do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there. I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamond glints on snow. I am the sun on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in the morning's hush, I am the swift uplifting rush of quiet birds and circled flight. I am the soft stars that shine at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry, I am not there. I did not die." Thank you.